Hello, I'm Yang Ray and reporting live. The Scottish decision to release al-Megrahi, the only Libyan terrorist convicted of the worst atrocity in British history, has drawn strong protests from the US. This perpetrator of the 1988 Lockerbie bombing has been given a reception of a national hero in Tripoli, capital of Libya. 270 people were killed in the tragedy. The Western media hype attributes the early release of al-Megrahi to energy deals between Libya and the UK. The allegation has been vehemently denied by Downing Street, citing compassion as the sole excuse. Scottish legal authorities argue that Mr. Megrahi is terminally ill and will die in a few months after returning to his own country. To take a closer look at the flare-up of the legal controversy, we are joined here live by Mr. Victor Gao Zhikai and Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director of Lehman, Lee and Xu. We shall talk to Dr. John Armstrong, an Irish visiting scholar from Fudan University in Shanghai, in a short telephone interview pretty soon. But before we start the interview, let us look at this footage. But in the second half of the program, we shall turn to the US to look at why Mr. Bernanke has been nominated as chairman of the Federal Reserve for another 4 years, despite its poor ability to foresee the devastating financial meltdown. That will be in the second half of the program, but up first, let's look at this news story.
Akaskill addressed the Holyrood Parliament on Monday.
No compassion was shown by him to them, but that alone is not a reason for us to deny compassion to him and his family in his final days.
Al-Megrahi is the only man convicted of killing 270 people, including 189 Americans, in the 1988 bombing of Pan Am Flight 103. The jet crashed in the Scottish town of Lockerbie. Al-Megrahi was released last week on compassionate grounds because he is terminally ill with prostate cancer. Some Scottish legislators, Britain and the US, criticized the lavish reception al-Megrahi received when arriving at Tripoli's airport. A conservative leader argued that al-Megrahi should have been detained to receive treatment in Scotland.
Compassion and justice would have been better served by that approach than by a convicted terrorist being feted as a hero in Libya to a backdrop of waving saltires.
Both the US government and families of the bombing victims criticized the release. Scottish officials have stressed the differences between their judicial system and those of Britain and the US. Compassionate release is a regular feature of the Scottish system when a prisoner is near death. Al-Megrahi was sentenced to life in prison after convicted in 2001 of taking part in the bombing. He was convicted largely on the evidence of a shopkeeper who identified him as having bought a shirt, scraps of which were later found wrapped around the bomb that brought down the jet. Al-Megrahi has steadily maintained his innocence, but he dropped his appeal last week so he could be released on compassionate grounds. James Kim, CCTV.
Welcome back. Now, Victor and Edward, given your legal background, do you think the early release of Mr. Megrahi a mockery of justice?
I think so. I think, first of all, Scotland and Britain in general should not have done this because it's done on the basis of compassion and mercy. However, I think in this particular situation, Megrahi was convicted of a murder and he was sentenced to life, and we had 270 lives lost. And what about all the family members? What about society in general? You know, I think all these considerations have been completely marginalized by the decision to release this criminal.
But it seems to be a common practice for the Europeans to conduct an early release of those serious criminals, and there has not been a single voice from victims of the Lockerbie bombing so far at this moment. What do you make of the differences here?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, at first blush, when you take a look at it, it would be like Victor Gao said, which is seems to be a mockery of justice. But if you followed the case like I followed the case since 1988, since it happened, and you see what the facts are, you'll find that this is not necessarily something that is unknown to all parties.
But do you think the compassion and the mercy are convincing enough for an early release of those
No,
guys?
because when you follow the rules...
You agree with Dr. Victor Gauchika?
No, I don't think that they should have followed. I'm a cancer survivor myself, so I was diagnosed here in China with given 12 months to live 3 years ago. And I am still alive and kicking and have no problem whatsoever. If you look at the facts of the case, with Megrahi, there was an anonymous doctor that has given a report that said he was going to die within 3 months. If he doesn't die within 3 months, then we'll see who is correct and who's incorrect. And the case may be actually that he will be around for a lot long time, and I think that this whole thing has been settled. There's no voice from the victims' families, and I'll tell you why. There was $2.17 billion paid out in an escrow account by Libya.
Excuse me, you mean family members of the victims of the Lockerbie bombing have been silenced by the large sum of compensation money?
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's a potential that probably happened. That each and every person, and Victor Gao knows this, each and every person who is signing a release form as a victim of as a family member of the victims probably has some requirements where they will not say bad things about the government of Libya or whatever it is, because they were the ones that paid the money. So lawyers received $300 million in this thing. The United States government has lifted its its terrorist designation on Libya. The protests, in my mind, are really paper tigers on behalf of the United States government.
Victor, why do you think the Americans are so angry, particularly the American government? President Obama says it's objectionable, and Hillary Clinton says it's deplorable, and the FBI director says it's unforgivable. It cannot be forgiven. What do you think of their anger?
Actually, on this case, it is one of the very rare cases which I can cite by the U.S. position very, very completely. Now, from the U.S. perspective, they condemned this for two reasons. One, they insisted that the Scottish government and the British government in general should not have released Mr. Megrahi.
Excuse me, can the two governments exercise any political influence on the legal decision? I mean, the legal and judicial system enjoys complete independence.
No, the Secretary of Justice is a government official. He is not part of the court system. He is a government official. He reports to the Scottish government, and I think...
Is it a political decision or a legal verdict?
Well, I think it seems to be a
political decision.
Judiciary decision made by the Secretary of Justice, but in essence, I think it is a very politically driven. Because right now, Prime Minister Gordon Brown has also come out to condemn the decision, and he wants to distance himself as well as the British government away from this decision.
I don't think Mr. Gordon Brown, the British Prime Minister, condemned the decision. He condemned the way this guy Megrahi was received at the airport of Tripoli.
No, he actually kept his distance from the decision made by the Scottish government. He kept saying that this has nothing to do with the British government. It's decided by the Scottish government, and he wanted to, differentiate the Scottish government versus the British government.
Right, but here's the problem: is that's exactly what you're seeing. Is that nobody's to blame for this? Do you notice that? I mean, nobody's taking full responsibility. Like I said, it doesn't even meet the Scottish Cases Criminal Review Committee rules and regulations, which says that you must have within 3 months to die. When they did a medical report, they said, maybe he'll die in 2 years, maybe 8 months, but it's unclear. But he did not meet those requirements.